it's a pose that we do a lot in a vinyasa practice. Many of us may not feel fully comfortable in downward dog. There are some modifications that I'll give you that can help you feel more comfortable in your downward dog, but that also may help actually support how you want to move and start to retrain your muscles to move and support you both on and off the mat. Because ideally, as we know, our practice is not just something we're coming onto our mat to do and then we leave. This is helping to affect, change, improve the way that we hold ourselves in our practice and then off in our everyday lives, so that we can start to avoid some injuries, and we may even help repair and heal some muscular imbalances, postural weaknesses or habits, etc. So for downward facing dog, I remember hearing when I first started that downward dog is a resting pose, and just thinking like, oh my god, that sounds insane. Like, how could I rest in downward dog? It's so much work, right? Oftentimes, in the beginning, if we're weaker in our upper body or we're tight in the shoulders, we're taking a brunt of the work in the upper body. We're either taking it in the shoulders or we're doing a lot of work in our wrists. You may feel like downward dog is just so much pressure on your wrists, right? Eventually, we want to take the bulk of the work into the lower body. These big muscles of the legs are designed to do the efforting in downward dog, really root us down. So to help that balance, a couple things. So first things first, in downward dog, when we're starting out, this thing that I'm talking about with the weakness or tightness in the upper body, it may send us from what we think we want to look like in downward dog into something where we're working in the shoulders, putting a lot of weight into the wrists. We might even be rounding up through the fingers and compressing even more into the wrists. So, we know that we want to start by spreading out the hands, pressing down into the knuckles of the fingers as best we can. That's going to help. That rooting down into the hands is going to help you start to transfer the weight back into your legs. Right? But for so many of us, our hamstrings will restrict our ability to keep the low back long. Right? So instead of taking a hamstring stretch into the backs of the legs, and as a result, compromising the length in the low back and taking the work into the upper body, the easiest modification and most accessible modification would be to bend the knees. That releases the hamstrings. Then we can push into the hands, lift the sitting bones up, and get that length in the low back. This should feel really good. Now my legs are working here, but the upper body is extended. There's no real weight in the shoulders or in the wrists. In fact, I could even come up onto the tips of my fingers here and really accentuate that length in downward dog. So this is an exaggerated bending of the knees, but even a little slight bend to the knees in downward dog will help release the hamstrings, allow you to stretch into your low back. And at the end of the day, it might look really pretty, or like the cover of Yoga Journal, to have a downward dog with straight legs and this nice long spine. But if you had to choose one, most of us are going to want that length, that release in the low back, than being like, oh, I feel so good because I stretched my hamstrings today, which feels good too, but most of us have more pain in the low back. So another thing just to throw out there, it's a little more challenging to integrate in a vinyasa class because we're moving kind of quickly through the poses. But if you're a downward dog for a while, or you're playing with downward dog at home, it can be really helpful to just take blocks, or books or whatever you have at home underneath your hands. So this, by design, is going to shift more weight into the lower body. It's going to allow you to really stretch the upper back, mid back, and low back. Right? And maybe you even bend the knees, even here. Right? So downward dog, maybe a little bit of time before you're in downward dog as your resting pose, but there are ways to make it more available to you.